Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. We're going to run down some off-season news, notes, and nuggets coming out of the 40 acres. And CJ, let's address the injury situation right at the top. Once the team got back for the start of the spring semester, Steve Sarkisian released that a few guys had surgery, postseason surgery. One of those guys was Arch Manning on that foot. What's the latest going on with Arch and kind of his prognosis coming back from that foot surgery?
Yeah, Arch remains in a boot. Of course, Texas is going to be as cautious with this foot injury as they possibly can. Arch is, the face of the team, essentially, especially on that offensive side of the football. So everything will be according to the doctors. They won't shortcut anything, and there's no need to. It would be nice to get him out on the spring as quickly as possible to throw with Cam Coleman, continue that relationship with Ryan Wingo, Emmett Mosley, and some of these youngsters. But altogether, Texas is going to be very cautious with Arch Manning. And as of recording today, he remains in one of those heavily protected foot boots, if you will. And that's kind of the place for him at the moment.
Now, let me just throw in the obligatory, hey, they put you in a boot for, if you got slight discomfort. They don't take it anytime you're dealing with foot, ankle, turf toe, whatever it is, they put you in a boot. But it's key to mention, CJ, anybody that may be freaking out about, hey, Arch's prognosis, this is straight from the program. It was minor foot surgery as a preventative measure to address a previous injury, was expected to be limited during offseason workouts, is expected back during spring practice. And we got this question actually in the middle of the week on one of the live streams asking, hey, is he going to throw at the pro day? I'm kind of with you. You said in your update, my best bet is probably not. It could be Matthew Caldwell. It could be KJ Lacey. It may even be Diabell out there throwing. I don't know who's going to throw for Jack injuries at pro day, but to your point, nothing is worth risking further injury and or setback to your franchise quarterback.
Yeah, of course. The NFL draft is towards the back end of April 23rd to April 25th. Of course, the pro days normally around 3 to 4 weeks before then for Texas. So does that mean anything for Arch when it comes to, his availability? I don't know, right? That's probably, again, towards the back end of March, maybe, that first week of April that we'll see the Texas Pro Day. But altogether, right now you have to wait and see for Arch to get fully back on the field, because in these notes I also talked about is KJ Lacey that's kind of leading the way with the quarterbacks and the wide receivers when they start throwing on routes on air, any type of one-on-one drills. It's Lacey heading the charge right now because, of course, he is the next quarterback up and the healthiest at the moment.
CJ, let's wrap up the injury news, notes, and nuggets. Ryan Wingo, you've reported this. Bobby Burton's reported this. He's doing well, on track to be back by the start of spring practice. Trevor Goosby in a sling, and nothing really of note on the progress of Xavier Filsaime. Your confidence level on Wingo seems high. Where are you at with Trevor Goosby in terms of his availability for spring practice?
Yeah, they're, again, going to take it day by day. Not going to press anything. I don't think you're going to see a full spring for Trevor Goosby, but again, this is about a month and a half away from where we'll really start to see the bulk of spring football. Again, there's no need to rush, and it might actually be a benefit in an odd way for Texas to figure out who that third offensive tackle could be. Is it Jordan Coleman? Could it be a Jonte Newman? Who figures into being that next guy up? Could a Kojo, if he is healthy, which is continuing to progress from his ACL a year ago. So we'll have to wait and see. But altogether with Goosby, it's going to be much of the same, where you don't press, you don't push, you just let it naturally come back to health.
I think at this point with Trevor and with Arch, just keep him in bubble wrap. Just make sure they get to the Texas State game healthy, and everything else you'll figure it out in the meantime. CJ, one guy that you wrote about in your notes that really, to me, he's kind of one of those X factors, those wild cards, those unknowns, whatever label you want to put on him, just because we haven't talked a ton about him and he kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But Amari Winston at tight end. We've talked a lot about, I'm excited about Nick Townsend and his future, his development. We've talked about Michael Masunis and the factor he can be in the run game, but Amari Winston's one of those guys that flashed a little bit last year, not to the extent maybe that like a guy like Smith Orobo did, but CJ, I wasn't expecting to see him at all last year, but when we did see him, I was like, all right, looks like there might be something there.
Yeah, only a handful of catches last year, Jeff, but I remember specifically a couple of them going for about 20 or 30 yards, and you sit there and you say, whoa, A big explosive play out of the tight end position, a guy that you probably weren't expecting, guy that probably wasn't on the radar of opposing teams in the scouting report. And you sit there and say, this feels like found money. Well, I've heard that he has certainly addressed his frame and started to rebuild a lot of, what he came into college to work with in regards to his physical stature. So a great sign there. Of course, Amari came in probably, 6'2", 6'3". He's kind of on the shorter side for a tight end. Yeah. But of course, there was a lot of physical maturity that needed to happen. And so far, it sounds like throughout the remainder of that, or the back half of the 25 season and going into, the winter conditioning portion of the offseason now, he certainly has bought in and has started to really change how he looks physically as well, which would be a plus to this tight end room.
I've said this before about him, and I know Sark doesn't use like a fullback in his offense, even to the extent like Lincoln Riley did with some of the pieces he inherited. When I watched Mario Winston, body type wise as a high school recruit, reminded me a lot of when I watched Dimitri Flowers out of the San Antonio area when he was in high school. Now Flowers went to OU and he was an H-back, sniffer, fullback, whatever. CJ, that's why like you think, okay, he's an undersized tight end. Like, yeah, don't get so caught up in what he lacks that you miss those really good things he brings to the table.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And, I said 6'3". He's probably firmly at 6'1.5", 6'2", right? So he's even shorter than maybe I gave him credit for. But to your point, if he can get that extra armor, and, you're certainly going to need some if you're ever used as a sniffer or an inline blocker at the tight end spot, which we've seen every Texas tight end at some point be used as such. That's going to be very important. So that fullback build in a tight end role, if you can run routes the way that he does as fluently and catch passes with his hands as well as he does, that's something that I think Texas will find usage of coming up in 26.
No doubt. CJ, we won't hit everything that's in your notes because I want to encourage people to go to ontexasfootball.com and check that out. If you're not a member over there, go ahead and jump in the conversation. Plenty of news, notes, and nuggets and information posted each and every day over on the website. But the KJ Lacey thing is interesting. And you and I have talked about it. And I think you, myself, and Bobby, I think the three of us were kind of on the same page in terms of our ears kind of perked up. And when we watched KJ throw the football in the few glimpses of open practice that we got. And then I think the three of us also kind of got hung up on what Sark said. Hey, when he's in there, the ball just moves. And it's a really good opportunity. We talked about the big spring for him because what he does really in 2026 is going to determine your portal plan at quarterback going into 27. Do you need a guy to compete for QB1, or do you believe in KJ Lacey enough that you just needed to bring in that veteran to maybe compete with Diabell for the number 2 job? But CJ, it sounds like he's at least early on taking advantage of this opportunity he's got with
absolutely. And this is, again, to know a little bit about KJ Lacey. Any opportunity he is presented, he will take advantage as such. And what's interesting is when you go back to last spring or even fall camp, when you really started to hear KJ and, sometimes that second unit, most times that third unit starting to have success moving the football offensively, a lot of that came because of his legs, right? He was under pressure often because of the offensive line at the time. His legs allowed him to escape. And we talked about it plenty of times from his high school days. His legs, he uses them to then create with his arm. Well, what we saw in that transition to college is his legs were then gaining yards rather than looking more so to extend plays, escape pockets, and then find guys with his arm. So this is really interesting to hear his name and hear how he's kind of taken over, obviously, with that first group of offense for routes on air, one-on-ones where it's strictly arm-based, motions. I think that's fantastic for him. Then you can kind of piece them all together. And, of course, with Diabell and MJ Morris now in the room as well, there's your competition as well.
And I think the other thing with KJ too, CJ, we don't need to lose light of this. Look, MJ Morris has starting experience at the FBS level. Diabell is insanely talented, but the advantage KJ has is he's been in this offense for a full year now. So even when Arch gets back and he's running the twos, he's got what I would consider a pretty serious leg up if he maximizes that advantage.
And that should be the case for just about everybody, right? And to add to that, it sounds like some of the youngsters are already starting to get a hold of the playbook, right? Cohen Brown, Jermaine Bishop. I've heard Cam Coleman, is certainly in the conversation. Sterling Burkhalter as well, who probably gets lost maybe more so than anybody out of this portal cycle. But for KJ to already understand when routes need to break off, what the timing looks like, what protections to adjust to or audible to, that's huge at the quarterback spot.
All right, CJ, we'll wrap this up. You did mention you've got some notes in there about Cohen Brown, more positive buzz for Tyler Atkinson. But the two names I wanted to hit on before we wrap this up, Zeno Mozolo, my guy, the guy I'm riding with as the wild card in 2026, Smith the Robo. Really good reports on both of those guys.
Yeah, look, they've bought in. And for years, it felt like the Texas edge room had kind of utilized guys maybe who weren't necessarily the prototypical build for an edge rusher, right? Well, that's changed, right? You have Colin Simmons leading the room, and I don't know, man. I'd tell you, Zena Amozolo might have the most physically impressive build in that room at the moment. Now, we'll wait and see how Richard Wesley kind of shapes his body over the next couple of months. But you look at Zena, 6'5" and change, 255 pounds, and he's cut. Like, he's bought into this offseason. He looks good. I've heard praise for several different voices so far for him. And then, of course, Smith Robo, who Jerry Hamilton and I got to walk to practice for bowl practice. And, we sat there and we said, this looks like a completely different player from even 6 months ago when his college football career began. So two really impressive notes there. Two guys that have certainly bought into the offseason training and really started to reshape their body as well.
Will Muschamp's got a lot of pieces with the potential to disrupt the quarterback. I can't wait to see what he does with them. March 9th, not that far away from Texas, starting spring practice at the Pro Day. We haven't gotten the date for Pro Day yet, but it's usually somewhere around the start of spring practice. And then April 18th, if you haven't circled it yet, do so now. That is the to-be-determined format of whatever the spring game is going to be, but at least the spring game is back. We will get to see the Longhorns on the field in some way, shape, or form this spring, and looking forward to it. CJ, thank you for the knowledge and expertise as always. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing. I just want to remind you, if you're not over at ontexasfootball.com, you can get over there right now, sign up, get in the discussion forums, get our news notes and nuggets that we're dropping every day. Plenty of good stuff going on the website. Make sure that you like this video and that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel. That way, whenever we go live or we drop a video, you're not missing any of our Longhorn coverage. For CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, welcome.